Merry Christmas, everyone. Wherever you guys are in the world, I really do hope that you are having the most wonderful time and that tomorrow you wake up to loads of presents and you get to spend the whole day with, your nearest and dearest, most loved ones. Today, this video is going to be about Bram Stoker's Dracula. This is the first book I read live on Twitch, and I made it into an audiobook, so I'll put the link in the description down below. And if I'm being honest, I didn't really go into this book because I particularly wanted to read it. That's not to say I didn't want to read it, but I guess because of that, I didn't really have any expectations going into it. So I chose to read Bram Stoker's Dracula because I like the cover. I've got this beautiful Penguin Classics cloth-bound edition that I think I stole from a coffee shop I used to work at. And Dracula is precisely the sort of book I want to read live on my Twitch because it's public domain, so I won't get struck by copyright. And it's also a classic that I probably would not have read otherwise. And the goal of reading these books live on Twitch is, well, it's to hold me accountable. And eventually I want to read something like a Brothers Karamazov or a War and Peace, like one of those really big, thick Russian ones that everyone says they've read. But have they really? Anyway, it's good. I mean, it is damn good. I said earlier that I didn't have any expectations going into it, but I think if I'm being honest, I had some reservations about the fact that it's epistolary. And in my mind, epistolary is like back and forth between two characters, and there's a bit of a time lag, and I thought that meant it would be a bit boring and a bit slow, and maybe like the story would be restricted because of the structure. And it doesn't really help that earlier in the year I read The Sorrows of Young Werther. I'll put a link to that down below too. Well, actually that was only from Werther's side, so it's just like a one-way epistolary book. But no, not at all. If anything, the epistolary structure just added to the book. It added definitely to the tension, and it was a lot more creative than I thought it would be. More on that later on in the video. So yeah, let's just dive straight into it. This is gonna be a no spoiler review of Bram Stoker's Dracula. Like, share, subscribe. Bram Stoker was an Irish author. Yeah, an Irish author, not English. 1847 to 1912. And he began his writing career as a theatre critic, first in Ireland, then in London. And he actually became later on in his life the business manager to the Lyceum Theatre in London's West End. It's still standing there. And somewhere in between, he was also the PA to the first actor to ever get a knighthood, an MBE, Sir Henry Irving. He's a really interesting character. I'll put a link to him down below as well. Bram, or Mr. Stoker, but Bram to his friends. He wasn't just a one novel wonder. He actually wrote a fair few novels, but none as famous as Dracula, obviously. The most notable of them would be maybe Lady Atheline, The Primrose Path, or The Shoulder of Shasta. But yeah, Dracula was by far his most famous novel, and it took on a life of its own. It really struck to the core of the zeitgeist, to the point where it's now one of the most known works in the whole of world literature. And I mean almost every idea associated with the vampire. So I'm thinking like the teeth, the prominent incisors, the widow's peak, the hairline, the hair, the disease of vampirism, how it progresses, the fact that they're nocturnal and kind of sexual too. Like that would not have entered popular consciousness if it weren't for Bram Stoker's Dracula. And I would say even the idea of the vampire might not have even entered popular consciousness if it weren't for this book. Because the idea of the vampire, it actually existed already in different folkloric traditions from around the world and throughout time as well. Just this idea of a supernatural, maybe undead creature, humanoid, that would suck your blood or steal your life. I'll put a link to the history of the vampire down below. There was even a novel titled The Vampire, spelt with a Y, written 80 years before Bram Stoker's Dracula by John Polidori. And this vampire was sophisticated, like Dracula, and he was charismatic, like Dracula. I'll put a link to that down below too. It's just links galore today, isn't it? It really was Bram Stoker's Dracula that pretty much created the main archetypes of the Gothic horror novel, of the vampiric novel. I mean, Dracula, Count Dracula, the character, is basically the vampire archetype. And actually, even Van Helsing he's like the prototypical vampire hunter archetype too. The novel opens with a journal entry from a Jonathan Harker. Jonathan Harker is an English solicitor, so English lawyer, and he's going on his first professional assignment to visit a Transylvanian nobleman in his castle. So Jonathan is a little bit green. He is wet behind the ears still, if that's the right idiom. He's a little bit green, he's a little bit keen, he's eager to please. And this Transylvanian nobleman is called Count Dracula. Count Dracula wants to buy some property in London, so he's hired Jonathan Harker's firm to help out with the legal side of things. Immediately from Harker's initial journal entries, the atmosphere becomes heavy and dark and sinister. Like, I was taken aback by how quickly it becomes like that, because from the very first carriage ride to the castle, which by the way is dilapidated, from the very first carriage ride, it's a stormy night. There are howling wolves. The villagers are warning him not to go there. I think one even gives him a cross to protect himself. There are secret passages inside the castle. The threatening sense is looming. It's right there. All typical Gothic horror stuff, which is interesting because the heyday of Gothic literature was really about 100 years before the publication of this book, Bram Stoker's Dracula. Like the guy I mentioned earlier, John Polidori, he published The Vampire with a Y. He published The Vampire 80 years before Dracula. Mary Shelley, her Frankenstein was published in 1818, which was also about 80 years before Dracula. Like, who are the big names in Gothic literature? Edgar Allan Poe, 1809 to 1849. The Bronte sisters, Charlotte, Emily, and Anne, they unfortunately also died young like Edgar Allan Poe, but they were all gone by 1860 at the latest. And that's like a good 30 years before Dracula by Bram Stoker was published. So just back to the structure, it's not just Harker's journal entries that are conveying the narrative in Dracula. We also get the diaries of other characters. We get newspaper clippings, which I thought was really creative. I wasn't expecting that at all. And of course, we get letters between the characters. And what that means is we get to see the journey of the information, kind of like Dracula's journey to England. But we know more than the characters. And we get to see them get caught up with what is happening, which is just fantastic for building that tension and creating that atmosphere. Plus, with the newspaper articles, especially because some of them have interviews in them, we get a glimpse of the wider impact of the horror of Dracula coming. Isn't that just such a creative use of the epistolary structure? We see, as the reader, the story unfold from different points of view and also at different speeds as different characters work out in their own time what is happening. The dramatic irony of which, to me, just seemed like genius level, because as the reader, we already know. So Dracula is set in Victorian England, mostly in this coastal town called Whitby, which is where Bram Stoker, Bram to his friends, once holidayed. It's also set a little bit in Transylvania, and the main themes are like superstition, tradition versus modernity. And people have written a lot about how Dracula reflects the cultural anxieties of the time, the cultural anxieties of Victorian Britain, of like the unknown coming from the far-flung edges of the empire. And also fears about immigration too. Like, some people have even argued that Dracula is a metaphor for these societal fears and that this book is some kind of critique of that.
I don't know.
What I found most interesting about Bram Stoker's Dracula, Bram to his friends, is this romantic idea of honor. Like how a gentleman is honorable and how an honorable person always does the right thing. In the book, thematically, it's linked to that fear of the other. And in that sense, it's very self-congratulatory. It's also like racist, like straight up racist, because we are honorable, you aren't, we do the right thing, you vampires don't. So I want to isolate this idea of honor from that theme, because that idea of honor is what I found most interesting, because it's very ideal. It's something to aspire to. It's like a moral code. It's like an ethical code on how to behave without some stupid justification. You know, like the religious do unto others as you would like done unto you. And the justification to that is because God will punish you otherwise. Or like you have the eat, pray, love types that say love is the answer. And the justification to that is because what goes around comes around.
Dude.
And I imagine if you were to ask a Victorian gentleman what their justification is for doing the right thing, they would simply say, it's because I'm a gentleman. I do the right thing because I'm a gentleman, which is a tautology. And I love that. It requires no additional beliefs. You don't need to believe in God. You don't need to believe in karma. You just do the right thing because you're someone who does the right thing. I do the right thing because I'm someone who does the right thing. And how accessible is that? Anyone can be a gentleman, a woman, a minority, a whatever you are. You can be a gentle person. Anyone can be diligent, considerate, kind. Anyone cannot be a dick. Anyone can just be a nice guy, just be a nice person. Isn't that beautiful? There's no gatekeeping at all to being a good person. So obviously Dracula as the big bad, I mean the book is named after him. He is the star of the show here. Interestingly, you don't see him all that much, but his specter is there all the time. And it's his specter that kind of looms over the whole book, casting the mood and the atmosphere. And he just pervades everything. And it's almost as though he is everywhere, even though the character is physically not there with the other characters in the book. And if you were to watch Dracula adaptation, and I'm thinking specifically of, you know, the one with Gary Oldman and Keanu Reeves and Winona Ryder, you need a character through whose eyes you see the story unfold, and that is usually Jonathan Harker, so he becomes the de facto protagonist or the hero. But for me, my favorite character, and for me, the character that really stitches everything together, like literally as well as metaphorically, is Jonathan Harker's fiancée, Mina Murray. I don't want to give away too much. I want the book to unfold for you as it did for me. So I'm just going to gush a little bit about Mina. I love her so much. She is the most loving friend. Anyone would be lucky to have a friend like her. And she is the most incredible partner, not just in the relationship sense to that lucky bugger, Jonathan, but also like partner in whatever endeavor you're doing. Like if I had to do something, some kind of project, I would choose Mina Harker to work with me every day of the week. She's a gentleman. Mina is a gentlewoman. Look, the book is set in Victorian England. And I think it's fair to say in Victorian England, in 1800s England, women get the short end of the stick. They tend to get short shrifted. So I really wasn't expecting at all of these romantic virtues to be so completely, wholly embodied in a female character. And because of that, for me, she really is the star of the book. But what did you guys think about her? In fact, who is your favorite character? Let me know down below. And actually also, tell me what you thought about Van Helsing. Because actually, I won't tell you what I think about him here. If you listen to my audiobook, link down below, you'll probably get a bit pissed off by how much I interrupt the reading with my opinions on Van Helsing. But you know, I'll get better. It's my first audiobook. I'll become more professional. Otherwise, yeah, that's it. If you've made it this far, thank you so much. To all two of you who are watching, happy holidays. I'm wishing you all the best wherever you are in the world.
Like, share, subscribe.